Hey everyone, it's Kai, and about a month ago, just before the release of the first Japanese booster pack for overdress, I went through every single archetype in that set and gave a deck for every single archetype. And now we're going to make a follow-up video to that because it's been a month, we've had a lot of time playtesting, refining decks, metagames have been developed, and this is just before, in a couple of days, the English format is going to get their first booster pack. So this is like a perfect time, right? People are going to wonder, what should I play? What should I play? Well, we've already figured a lot of things out. So here you go. Here's the answers. Maybe this will, it's not going to be the answers. We're going to give you some ideas, right? Ideas on where you can go with your builds on your decks. And maybe you can build something more creative than what is already around. So let's get started. We're going to start with Dragon Empire. We're going to start with Nirvana. So Nirvana really hasn't changed much, right? Everything here is just pretty much the same as it was before. Oh yeah, by the way, the program I'm using is CFE Plus. It's pretty good for making videos and streaming, and everything's in English, right? And you got some nice clear spaces to put your face, so I'll put it on the right. But yeah, this is, just go check it out. Put it in the description below. Yeah, Nirvana really hasn't changed. The biggest thing that has changed here is that we're running the Sunrise Egg starter again. Now, why, right? The whole reason why we ran Trickster starter before, because we wanted to confirm double Trickster push when we reach like grade 3, right? But turns out, going first is pretty good in overdress. So when you go second, you kind of want to have that draw to be able to at least have a slightly fairer game. If you don't have the draw, you're basically giving up 50% of the time, right? Or going to a very bad position 50% of the time. So we need the Sunrise Egg starter. And turns out, the Trickster aggro is not that amazing. We don't need it. You just naturally draw into one Trickster anyway. The biggest play that this deck has early game is like overdressing the arcs and drawing cards. That's the most important play you need. So we already get a Trickstar from just our ride line, so all we need to draw is the arcs. That's the most important, right? Turns out the deck is fast, but you don't need to go super aggro and then get damage denied and lose, right? So we still have some decent plays, but overall that is the big change. We still run the 10k booster because personally I think Tenchestead is not very good. And then we're still running some of these 15k orders, which are nice, but these are basically some of your flex slots. If you want to replace them with anything else, you can. You'll find out there's not many. I know some people run the Tribash, the Triceratops, to get some crit and soul, and that you can try that out, it's all right. And also the trigger light up we have is just like draws of 8 crits, because crits are good and draws are good, because there's not really any other ways to get you advantage as well, right? We can't run fronts. So overall, that is the entirety of the deck. We can run, if you want, you can run like more draws and less crits, but overall, I think this is just kind of, it's not very flexible deck, Nirvana, but it does its job well. The next Dragon Empire deck we're looking at is Eugene. Now, this is widely regarded as one of the worst decks in the entire set at the moment, so it's going to be very, very cheap. Now, I know a lot of people did mention that my Eugene build in the first video wasn't good. I agree, it was pretty bad. And so we have a new Eugene build here. This is the one that topped the Vision tournament, and there's quite a few similar builds floating around. I think there's a Japanese build that run 4 Sunlight Punishments. The biggest problem with Eugene personally is that it's a very, very clunky deck for not much rewards. And also you need to kind of clear out your opponent's board, which sometimes is hard without Sunlight Punishment. So yes, we have Sunlight Punishment here. We run 2 of it because we don't really run too many as well. So if we run too many orders, it kind of interferes with Eugene's skill. And then we run a lot of more retire cards to trigger, to proc those retire effects off as well. So we run Drag, Ritar, Alwalith, which can help us retire, and then once we retire something, we can proc off Nigel's skill and Shigamanago's skill to kind of make empty fields and get some sort of advantage or things like that, right? So overall, we have a lot of more ways to plus. The only kind of the flex slot here is like Tenchestead. You can kind of run anything else instead, but this kind of helps you search for another Persona ride, which gives us soul and gives us power if something hits, so that's okay. Overall, the best card of this deck I find is Tribash, because it gets crit and it means you can just randomly have good pressure on your opponent. Also build soul, puts itself into soul, which is what you need. Now, one of the hardest part of this deck is that it uses double resources, and it basically, a lot of decks heavily use one resource. They use a lot of counterblast or they use a lot of soul, right? And then in this one, in Eugene, right, it uses both. It uses a lot of counterblast and it uses a lot of soul to kind of power some not great effects, right? But because you can use either, you can kind of in theory you can afford the not great effects because you can just use the other soul when the other resource when you want. But in practice, it doesn't really work. In practice, it doesn't really work that well. But look, this is kind of like a slot machine deck. Eugene's all about that slot machine. You want to see what you get in your top cards. Can it be garbage? Can it be amazing? It's part of the fun of this deck, I guess. The other fun part of this deck is that it's super cheap. It's like in Japan, people were buying the I think the SP versions for like 1 yen or something like that, or 10 yen. So yeah, if you want to full holo this deck, super cheap, super meme. People will if you bring this out, people will be like, wow, you're such a fun guy, you're such a cool dude. So yeah, that's, if you want to earn some kudos, go for it. Right. Moving on to the dark states, we have Bruce. This is widely regarded as one of the best decks in the format, I think. It's very, very consistent. It has a great finisher. So yeah, it's really, really nice. This is kind of like the, I guess, kind of the standard build of Bruce, if you want to call it, the less aggressive version. This is the one that I like a lot. It runs Brodies for defense, and you know, it runs Gungnir, or Gungunram for extra Soul Blast, but also Soul Charge, but also you can Soul Blast to draw. The good thing about this deck is it naturally gets the 5 Soul that you need for the Final Rush finisher, and you know, you can kind of use Gungunaram's skill just early game if you want to, because by the time you get to Final Rush, you have a lot of cards that will Soul Charge, so you can just use the Final Rush without really caring. Maybe later on you have to really care about if you want to use this or not, but early on you can just use this once and get an extra draw, which can kind of, you know, tide you through to your Final Rush turns. Now, a lot of people say this deck has a lot of problems going second. It auto loses going second. I 100% disagree. You have to learn how to play going second and first, and being able to play your vanilla turns without losing too many resources for your Final Rush turn. That is the key thing you have to learn when playing this deck, because you can't just not play down anything in the early game going second, because you're just going to lose tempo and get steamrolled, and your Final Rush turn will just be you hitting your opponent's life from like 1 to like 4, and then you getting killed the next turn. So you can't do that. You have to actually play. Now, there's some cards that help you do that. Brody, you can commit it early, because if you intercept with a Brody, you can still use its skill for the 10k shield, which is nice. So it has 2 functions, right? Also, your Eden, Diablo's boy Eden, can do pretty well, because his second effect doesn't require Final Rush. So you can like attack a Vanguard and force your opponent to guard, or you can attack your opponent's reguards, and then if that hits, you can CB1 and then retire something else. So you get like 2 in 1, right? 2 with 1 effect. So that's pretty good. That's some really decent pressure that early game you can really, when you have. And then if you like lose these cards, generally not too problematic, because you've got better cards later on, like Marjorie's you want to commit down that will, you know, help you draw and get a bunch of cards. So overall, it's very important for you to just be aggressive early, or maintain aggression throughout the early parts of the game, so that your Final Rush turns can really start hitting those lethal attacks and killing your opponent, right? So that's one skill you have to learn, and then, you know, the rest of the lineup is just, you've got some draws just to kind of get through, and then we run one of this 15k order just because, you know, extra shield is kind of nice. But you can replace this with anything else. You can run another Gungunaram. One thing also is that sometimes you do draw a lot with Marjorie and Gungunaram, so if you're not careful, you'll have situations where you Soul Charge a bit too much, and then you'll reach deck out if your opponent got like some defensives early on. So just keep that in mind. Maybe you want to be careful what you spam with this, and the Proto Ball will basically get you what you need. You can get a Persona Ride, or if you really worry about the defense, you can get like a Over Trigger or like a Null Guard, so that you can, you know, defend your next turn and go for another Final Rush turn. So just learning that balance between the vanilla turns and then your full rush turns is very, very important as a Bruce player. There is another build for Bruce that has kind of been floating around, and that is the more Japanese aggressive Bruce. And this one runs the Colossus just because it's nice. It uses the Counterblast, which you don't really use, right, in the Bruce deck. The only thing you use Counterblast for Bruce is like Protobulb, and then if you ran Brodies, that's what you do. Eden uses a Counterblast, but, you know, overall the usage for Counterblast is not very high. There's something that requires like 2 Counterblasts. So you can play down a Colossus and Counterblast one for that 15k, and then you get like, you can double dip the 15k with 15 rush, Final Rush, which is pretty nice, and allows you to be more aggressive, right? You don't run as many 2s, but you can kind of change that by, you know, you can take out like 1 of each of these 1s and then put in like 3 Brodies, or more of the Richards if you want. But just if you just want more grade 2 bodies on the field. Now, and then to be more aggressive, we run just a full set of just aggressive triggers, 8 crit, 3 front. So overall, that's pretty good. It's just more aggressive. You prefer the aggressive version than just the kind of the more balanced version. This is basically the deck they're running a lot in Japan. Next, we have another deck from Dark States. This is another very popular deck as well, and very, very strong. It is Baromagnes. Now, Baromagnes is based around Baromagnes, and you want to get him to 15 soul to be able to do 5 attacks, right? Now, this is currently the updated build of Baromagnes. Everyone's running Brothers Soul just to kind of hit those, hit the 15 as soon as possible, and sometimes you can hit 15 soul as early as the first turn of your grade 3 turn. So just a bunch of soul charge cards, and then sometimes if you don't hit 15, that's fine too. You just hit the 10k and the crit, which is just as good. It's decent. It's decent enough, right? It's decent enough. And just make 5 attacks. You run Deep Sonic is basically the cards that you kind of call out from Baromagnes' skill, because he's like 18k, then plus 10k from Baromagnes is like 28. So that's pretty good. I've seen builds from like Singapore where they cut out some Baromagnes to run even more soul charging cards. Like you can run the Fissure Colossus, Time Fissuring Colossus, which is just basically just a soul charge 1 written on it. So yeah, there's other ways. You can run more crawlings in the deck as well. Crawl You Insects is the order name. If you want to, you can run more of this and maybe less of Brother Soul. If you're not too caring about hitting the 15 soul, that means you're kind of more focused on the 10 soul, where you get the 10k and the crit, and can pump your Vanguard column really, really high to, force your opponent to null or just eat crits all day. So there's kind of slightly different ways to build it, but the super popular one at the moment is just running Brother Soul and, soul charging the 15 as soon as possible. Now, you can also not be afraid to just use Curtis's skill, although it's CB2, to give you a front row 5k, which sounds very, very low value. Because you have Selfish Engraver, this card basically is just a counter charge. So if you use up all your CB and you have this, you can just put into soul, and then bam, one counter blast is available to you for you to use Baromagnes. So that's basically Baromagnes. Very, very strong. A bit fragile as well defensively. It's a bit fragile. So, but if you really like the Shaharot from before, like super combo decks like that, then Baromagnes. It's also very, very cheap in Japan, but I'm not sure how that's gonna be in English, because people are aware of this deck, and people like these kind of decks. People like these combo decks. People like DI. It's kind of like DI. So yeah, this is, just bear in mind, it might not be that cheap in English. And also, you need 4 Brothers Soul. The start deck only comes with 3 Brothers Soul, so you need to buy 2 start decks. So be careful. Next we have is the Big Daddy Bastion deck. This is kind of the everyone thinks it is the best deck in the current format, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. You just kind of flip triggers, flip non-triggers, and win the game. I don't think this has really changed much from the beginning of overdress. This is basically based on the more Japanese builds, where it's pretty much solved. I think the entire deck is pretty much solved. You just run all these good cards, right? 4 Bastion, 4 Cookie Bill, just to be able to have some defense. Dark Strain, just to give you some big boosting numbers. Alden, just draw 2 pretty much, with the Hour of Holy Judgment cometh. Another more draw power. Reflute's really good because it fuels your soul, so you can kind of hit like more Dark Strains without having to Persona Ride, and it also gives 10k, so you can stack power on one guy and like kind of stand it multiple times. And then Fasado, this one just hits like counter charges and soul charges, so it has a lot of on-hit pressure, and then you just run nulls. The biggest weakness of this deck is that you don't have any early cards to play down, but who needs an early game when you can just bash your opponent with grade 3s, right? Your trigger line is just 8 crit and 3 draw, because 8 crit again, very good draws. You can run fronts if you want. It's not a big deal. But yeah, overall, very, very straightforward deck. Now, however, there is a build popping up nowadays that is kind of different, and that is Bastion Control. Now, you can see this deck is very, very different to the things that we saw before, and that is it runs 4 or multiples of the Swing Sword of Judgment. Now, decks either run 4 or 3 of this and 2 of the Hour of Holy Judgment come to just draw more cards, but they run multiples of this card. And this card is just when you Soul Blast a grade 3 to play it, and then you choose one of your opponent's regards. Your opponent puts all of their regards in that same column as that regard on the bottom of your deck. So it's basically a 1 for 2, right? It's a 1 for 2. Now, Why is Bastion playing this card? Well, this is actually pretty good against Stoikea. You know, you generally get a lot of value from this bottom decking his whole column. And then if he's put up some, like, you know, perfect guards that he wanted to bounce to his hand with Ghost Chase, or he has like an over trigger there that he wanted to bounce, bottom deck that stuff, because they don't really shuffle that much, and you know, put it back to deck so he can't bounce it, right? You can't immediately get the effect. Also against like Bastion mirrors, generally they want to play a whole field of grade 3s to be able to use their Kokabeel at max effect, but you bottom deck that whole column, suddenly their Kokabeel becomes very, very worthless. Of course, that means you don't run any Dark Strains in this deck, because you run a lot of, you know, extra soul blast, which is this, and then you also run a painkiller angels for some early game of pressure. But you don't really need that extra boost, because this is kind of like a more, it's not really a control deck, it's more like a mid-range deck, right? Where you're putting on pressure on your opponent, you're forcing them to commit more cards to the field every single turn. At the same time, you're beating their face with 4 attacks that are relatively still high powered. Like, even like if you have a Dark Strain, of course, they'll be hitting very, very big. But, you know, Bastion, just putting the front row down, is still pretty big by himself, and you still have like Reflux to give power. So overall, it's pretty decent. Your Painkiller Angels in the early game, you can place them down and do some attacks, and then move them to the back and boost your grade 3s later on. Of course, this also means your Kokabeel is not as strong, but you know, if you still run enough grade 3s that if you have a front row full of grade 3s and you put down a Kokabeel, it's still a 10k shield, which is still an okay number to get. Not amazing, but not bad as well. Not really terrible. So overall, like, if you really wanted to, you can just put down an extra grade 3 to hit like better shield lineup. Otherwise, it's just kind of more like a 10k shield rather than a big shield in this deck. You can run more draws as well in this deck just to go through your deck a bit more, but you know, you can lower that count by just putting an extra crit. But overall, this deck is just like, when you see this deck, you'll know it's kind of like a more controlled Bastion build when you see Painkiller Angels. Normally the normal Bastion build doesn't run any of the grade 2s or 1s. It just goes straight up grade 3, unless it's not. Also, of course, this also means that there's more ways for you to kind of fail with Bastion because you're running an extra set of 1s. That's fine, because you're putting on pressure the other way, right, with the Swinging Sword of Judgment. So overall, this is a very interesting build. I like seeing these kind of developments, and maybe we'll see, you know, some more developments with Bastion going forward. Next we have is Hexaorb. Now, Hexaorb is kind of like Bastion's cousin that doesn't get enough love. I know we've seen more Hexaorb plays recently, but basically one problem with, I think, Hexaorb right now is that everything that Hexaorb has, Bastion can just take. Even this Divine Sister Lepisto, you can run it in Bastion. I've seen Bastion X run this, because, you know, when you trigger a trigger, then you can stand your Lepisto, and then when you trigger the 3, you can stand the other column and make 5 attacks. So yeah, so that's the problem with Hexaorb as well. But overall, Hexaorb is still alright. It's not the best deck. It suffers from grade 2 syndrome, where Keta doesn't have any good grade 2s because it just has a bunch of good grade 3s. So you're forced to kind of run this Pistolito, which has a very, very low value skill. I know some people can just cut this and just run more grade 1s, but you know, 2s kind of help you hit that decent number, like going first. So kind of forced to run. I mean, you can run more of the Swordsman Heavily Win Wetchel, because it gets a 10k boost, so you can boost like an 8k and hit 18. But otherwise, yeah, no good grade 2s. Really big problem. Like, I've seen people run Rooks as well. You can commit Rooks early and then move it to the back, and it becomes a 15k beater because you still run a lot of grade 3s. But overall, yeah, you run Max Fasado just for that on-hit pressure, because, you know, your Divine Sister is Counterblast 2. You also run 2 Fasciatas, because it's just a Soul Blast 2 Countercharge 1. You do run a lot of Soul Blast. You kind of have to learn how to to control your soul, manage your soul. But, you know, it's getting counter charges to keep on standing your Lepisto is alright too. And then just make big Hexaorb plays, get your triple drives going. Yeah, it's honestly, it's like kind of sad, but you know, hopefully it's gonna get more support in the future. All right. Next we have is Magnolia. Now, Magnolia, I personally still don't like much of Magnolia, but there's a lot of developments with Magnolia that I can't really overlook, because they're really smart, right? They're really smart. So one thing you might notice that Magnolia does run a lot more draws, because it's all about that Persona ride, man. You want to draw into that Magnolia for the Persona ride. Right now, there's not really good ways to fish it out, but you know, they'll probably get that in the future. But otherwise, you kind of play this deck kind of as like you can play as a 4 attack deck until you get your Persona ride turn. Then you go, you explode on them with 6 attacks and annihilate them, right? overall, we run Ghost Chase because, you know, Ghost Chase is just overall a great card for Stoic Care. Bouncing like key cards back to your hand, and then, you know, replaying effects is just really, really good. Like, you can bounce Elidia back just to get, you know, more free cards. Bounce Mantis back, great. Even if you randomly call like an Overtrigger or a Null, you can just bounce it back to your hand. Good times, right? Overall, this is fine. This is fine. You run like a lot of the Dugas just because it's like it's free power gains, and just kind of play multi-attack. Try to push your opponent up as quick as possible to 5, so then you can drop your Magnolia and make those big 6-attack turns and just absolutely destroy them, right? You have to learn to be aggressive early though to kind of help you do that, because the problem with this deck is your opponent gets a damage trigger, and sometimes your deck kind of doesn't put up enough aggression. So, you know, trying to push the damage early is very, very important, and running these extra draws kind of help that as well. You know, surprisingly, draws give you more aggression because you're more free to play down cards, and especially since they're only 5Ks, well, you can even play them down and not feel bad. So, yeah, this is kind of the very standard build of Magnolia right now. But there is a new Magnolia deck that is making the rounds that I actually like more, and I think is way more consistent. I like to call this deck the Zorgnolia deck. It's because it runs the Zorga ride chain. And why do you do that? Because the whole point of Magnolia, the biggest problem with Magnolia is that you need to draw into the second copy of Magnolia to get the Persona Ride off to make those wombo combo turns, right? And then Zorga actually does that, because when you run Rancor Chain, you Soul Blast 1 to draw 2 cards, right? 2 cards, there's an extra card you draw. You also run more orders to kind of make up for this. So you run the Spiritual Body Condensation and the Ghost Chase. So you run 7 orders all up. So hopefully you have one in your hand that you can drop 4 Anger Chains to draw 2. But even if you don't have it, just draw 2 and discard 2, right? You just want to dig. And then you run the Husk Dragon, just so you can kind of get the order back, right? You can plus. So overall, it's okay. You can cut the Husk Dragon if you really want to. You can run the Lattice, the old Lattice one. So then you have an extra, the extra call when you ride the Magnolia. But otherwise, you know, there's variations to this. But the important part is the Rancor chain to get that extra draw going. Now, the advantages of just running more orders means that, you know, you can run Spiritual Body Condensation, which is pretty much just a free resurrect. But apart from that, the rest of the deck is kind of the same. Like here with more resurrection, you kind of with more resurrection, you can resurrect your Null Guards and your Overtrigger. So that kind of makes it nice, you know, 50k shield. We're running the Obara trigger as well. You can kind of run Stoicheia, the Stoicheia trigger, or the Obara trigger in either deck, because just the Obara is nice because it gives two sets of 100 million, right? So you can give it on your Geunosia, and then, you know, kind of plus power, or you can just give it on 2 separate things and just kind of push damage like that. So overall, you still run a lot of draws. Because you're just digging for the Magnolia. But overall, I do like this deck more than the other deck, just for the ride chain, making it slightly more consistent. The other deck we have out there is just plain old Zorga. This is the deck I kind of settled on for Zorga. I'm running 3 of the Cursed Soul Wriggles in Agony, just because I really want to see this early, and, you know, at least use the effect off like 1 time, right? So I can build a full field. So your first grade 3 turn, if you have this somewhere, and then you have a Spiritual Body Condensation in the other side. So let's say you have Spiritual in your hand, and then Cursed Soul Wriggles Agony in your drop zone, or the other way around. Then you basically can get like 3 cards from the drop zone. With Zorga, you can get 4 cards from the drop zone, and you just made a whole field for nearly free. If you have the Hendrina, then yes, it was pretty much free. But they also get some decent amounts of power, and then you can kind of bash that turn and make really strong. Zorga is the best 3-attacker deck right now, I think. It's just the kind of the most consistent. So it's kind of why I like it. You can even if you call like perfect guards or triggers from your Cursed Soul, it's fine. They get 5k more power, so they can hit like 10k numbers, and then you can bounce it back with Ghost Chase. Just bounce it back. You know, it's all good. It's all good. So yeah, I do like this. I do like this current build of the deck. You have a lot of orders as well. You run like 10 normal orders and just 13 orders all up. So you basically have an order to play every single turn in combo with Alchemagic, right? When you can't Alchemagic every turn, it becomes very, very sad. So just having a lot of orders means you can do that. And then with your trigger lineup, you're just going full aggro because you don't really need draws. You don't really need to draw any more cards because you don't really need to play that many cards down when you get a whole field for free, right? So yeah, this is the deck, pretty much Zorga at the moment. I know I've seen some interesting builds where they totally cut this card. They totally cut the Curse Soul and they just run full Grief and Despair, and then full Spiritual Body and Ghost Chase just for max consistency. So, and then put in some extra cards so you know they don't get kind of a like. They don't just have a handful of orders they can't use, because remember you can only play like one order a turn. But just bear in mind that if you don't have like at least one order to you know Alchemagic with every turn, it can feel bad, because using Grief, Despair, and Rejection as often as you can as well, like comping with either of these is great because it just makes big columns that you can really push your opponent's damage and then you know force a lot of guard out of. So that's, I think that's pretty important. Just run a lot of orders. Finally, we move on to Prison. Now, I think the biggest change for Prison is that we cut some defensive stuff and some imprisoning stuff and put in 4 of our grapple externals in. Now, grapple externals is very important because against smart players, they are not going to keep things in your prison, or they're going to play in a way where you will never get 3 prison. Right? So you're going to feel sad when you're in Seraph Snow. You don't get to, you know, triple drive because there's only 2 cards in your prison. But at least with grapple external, there is it's like the requirement for grapple external is very low. You only need like at least 1 card and it gets 15k. So start hitting numbers, you can start bashing face, and that's okay. Unless you play against Stoicheas, then Stoicheia really doesn't have any way to keep those things out of prison, or so you can just, it's free, right? We went less on these autonomic cautions. I think you can even cut it down to 2 and just maybe run another one of this lightning barrier. But it's just that letting your opponent like make the decision of whether they want to keep cards in your prison is just not great. They'll go, he's playing prison, he probably has autonomic caution, so I'm just gonna get all my boys out. So yeah, then this card just becomes 5k shield. Doesn't really have anything going on for it, because the main point in playing this is the 10k shield, and when you don't have that, then that feels bad. So cut that down a bit more, and then with the lightning barrier, we added 1 because it's counterblast. You have a lot of counter charge with Baromagnes, and then just this having it in your hand, 30k shield basically can stop a lot of things. And I've seen people run 2 of this because they believe the counter charge is pretty sweet with Baromagnes, and technically you don't really use that much counterblast anyway when you think about it, right? Like your Seraph Snow of course requires 1 counterblast to be able to imprison 2, but in matchups where you need to do that every single turn, then sure, you're gonna use up a lot of counterblast, but you got Baromagnes to kind of make up for it. But then there's matchups where stuff is just staying there. You don't need to imprison everything every turn to reach that 3 threshold, so you don't really need to use Seraph Snow's effect every turn. You still have Rouge, you still have Grenaro Fair Tiger. You still have Chevel Stud, which can do that. But of course, Chevel Stud does require Counterblast. But otherwise, you can just kind of maybe invest more into the lightning barrier. We run Chevel Stud and Kyanite Blue. I still like Kyanite Blue. Chevel Stud requires 3 cards in your prison to be able to draw a card. So if they're playing around the 3, then Chevel Stud will never draw your card. However, Kyanite Blue only needs 1, so you can kind of always draw a card. So that's kind of nice. And then we're running like fronts, because in situations where you can triple drive, we don't really need the draws, right? We get more aggression with fronts. And in situations where you can't triple drive, you really need to finish the game as soon as possible. So, you know, just front them and they die. So yeah, basically the biggest change is adding more grapple externals to play around those bad matchups where your opponent will not give you any prisons at all. And then lastly, we have Orfist. Right, so Orfist, the biggest change of Orfist is that we're running a lot of grade 2s. We're running more grade 2s. We're running 4 of the Cubicea, so that means 1 is in the ride line, and 3 Cubiceas are just sitting around. The reason why is we want to be more aggressive early on, because if, like, we're a 3 attacker deck, and if we don't put on any pressure early, your opponent's going to enter, like, you're going to go to grade 3, your opponent's like 1 damage or something, and then you're going to spend like an extra turn in trying to beat down your opponent with high-powered columns. But if you push early, maybe you buy yourself a turn and your opponent needs to guard earlier, and then that means you win sooner, which is important because this deck overall doesn't really generate much advantage as well. So you're on a clock yourself to be able to kind of beat beat your opponent down as soon as possible. So you want grade 2s early to be able to just slap down and put on pressure and force cards out of your opponent's hand. That's why you run a lot more Cubicias. And then like overall the rest of the deck is pretty similar. We run 7 of these orders because, you know, the In the Darkness nobody knows is pretty kind of low value. And then later on, you know, once you into your Orfist, as long as you've got your Abyssal Dark Knight, when you're on Orfist, you start popping out tokens, then you pop out more tokens, and then that's pretty much your gameplay. Overall, the deck is pretty one-track mind. I think it could do with way more work because it still feels kind of slow. That's why you have to play so aggressively early. But apart from that, you know, it's got nice aesthetics. So yeah, that's pretty much it for all the decks. To follow up to all the decks, if you want to go check out the deck log, I can put a link to them in the description below. But just if you want to kind of go through all the decks, but overall this is just it'll be in Japanese, right? But yeah, set 1's coming out very, very soon, so be sure to get set 1. It's really, really fun, and hopefully this video would have helped you with a more refined set 1 list and help you on your journey into Cardfight, Vanguard, overdress, and you can come up with more ideas in, you know, developing the format. I mean, we've seen crazy ideas. There's been like Orfist prison decks, you know. I think I've seen like a Bastion Hexaorb deck, things like that, so, or Hexaorb Bastions, things like there's been some crazy ideas going on, and you know, it's your turn to make crazy builds. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Hopefully this Eugene deck is better, because some guy at Vision top of it unfortunately didn't give the name. So if you're watching this video, yeah, let us know in the comments below. And yeah, if you got any criticism, of course, comments below as well. But I'll see you guys in the next video. All right. Oh yeah, we'll be doing top decks tomorrow, so we'll definitely see you in the next video. And if you just want to see more decks, make sure to check out our VG top decks videos, because they have a lot of decks that you can look, and we go through every single one and kind of explain it, right? So all right, that's it from me. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.